Well, hello, everybody. We're going to get started with the Getzen lecture on government accountability. Good afternoon and welcome to the 15th annual Getzen lecture on government accountability. It's hosted by the Department of Public Administration and Policy in the School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Georgia. I'm the dean of the school. My name is Matt Auer. This year's Getzen lecture was selected as part of the Provost's signature lecture series, as well as the university's Ethics Awareness Week, highlighting the importance of today's topic. Before introducing our speaker, I'd like to recognize a few people who are joining us today. First, we have many attendees joining us from across the country via Zoom. So for our virtual attendees, just a couple ground rules. I want to remind you that we can't see or hear you because it's a Zoom webinar, but we strongly encourage you to enter questions into the Q&A function inside of the Zoom webinar. And we will take those questions and we'll ask Inspector General Greenblatt your questions after his remarks. Joining us today, I know, is the founding dean and first lady of SPIA, Tom and Jeannie Loff. Welcome. And there are, of course, many SPIA faculty here. I want to especially recognize Brad Wright. Brad Wright is the chair of the Department of Public Administration and Policy, and his work in coordinating today's event was really important. There's also a team of folks, Laura Bain, Caroline Pachkowski, Sarah Baines, Lauren Ledbetter from SPIA also were key in putting together today's program. I also want to recognize the individuals who make this event possible every year. Catherine Getzen Willoughby, an alumna of our PhD program in Public Administration and Policy, and a member of our faculty in the Department of Public Administration and Policy, and Dan Hall Willoughby, a graduate of the Georgia School of Law. They're key for this program. This lecture honors Catherine's parents, Evangeline and Forrest, who are lifelong advocates for public service and education. So thank you, Dan and Catherine. And actually, maybe you could join me in doing that more formally. So thank you. I'm not sure if Catherine knows. Now I'd like to introduce you to this year's Getzen lecturer. Mark Lee Greenblatt began his tenure as the Inspector General for the U.S. Department of the Interior on August 26, 2019, after being confirmed by the U.S. Senate. As the Inspector General, Mr. Greenblatt leads a nationwide workforce of more than 270 investigators, auditors, evaluators, attorneys, and support staff. Their mission is to provide independent oversight and promote excellence, integrity, and accountability with the program's operations and management of the U.S. Department of Interior. Mr. Greenblatt is the senior official responsible for providing oversight of more than 70,000 department employees and assessing the department's diverse programs, which include roughly $10 billion in grants and contracts. The millions, billions, and trillions kind of run together these days. $12 billion in natural resource royalties and 30% of the nation's energy resources. That's a big portfolio. Federal trust responsibilities are also part of this portfolio for 573 Indian tribes and Alaska Native villages, and stewardship of 20% of the nation's lands. Mr. Greenblatt has been in the federal oversight community since 2003 as part of the legislative executive branches. Prior to becoming the Department of Interior Inspector General, he served as the executive director of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. That's CIGIE. CIGIE will come up in a couple more moments. He previously served in the leadership roles of the U.S. Department of Commerce Office of Inspector General and the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Mr. Greenblatt also served as an investigative counsel at the U.S. Department of Justice, OIG. Over the course of his federal career, he has received several awards, including a CIGIE Award for Excellence, U.S. Department of Commerce Gold Medal and Bronze Medals, and a U.S. Department of Justice OIG Distinguished Service Award. On January 1st, 2021, Mr. Greenblatt was appointed to serve as the vice chair of CIGIE, leading the Inspector General community's mission to combat fraud, waste, and mismanagement. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Mark Greenblatt as the 2021 Getzen Lecturer.
Hello, everyone. You're all familiar with the mean tweets segment of Jimmy Kimmel's late night TV show, right? Some big celebrity or athlete reads truly horrible tweets about themselves on national television. Well, if you haven't heard of it, you should check it out. It's pretty funny. Well, let's play Mean Tweets, Inspector General Edition. Now, I know I'm not a celebrity, but bear with me. I think this could be pretty funny. So here it goes. These are actual tweets. This is a false report. Hashtag fire Greenblatt. Hashtag Mark Lee Greenblatt always planned a hashtag whitewash. Take this stooge, that's me. Take this stooge off the case. He's an embarrassment to himself and the people who put him in office. Your IG has zero credibility, and his statement is total BS. Hashtag fire Greenblatt. The president needs to remove IG Mark Greenblatt for deliberately gaslighting the public with this sham of a report. Hashtag remove Greenblatt. When there are not only one, but two Twitter hashtags calling for your removal, that's when you know you've really made it. So let's step back for a moment and figure out, how did I end up on the receiving end of these mean tweets? Allow me to set the stage. It's June 2020, and protests are occurring in cities across the country in response to the death of George Floyd at the hands of local police. In Washington, D.C., many of those protests are taking place in Lafayette Park, which sits across the street, across Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House. In the early evening of June 1st, 2020, the United States Park Police and the Secret Service, in a joint command, along with 6 other agencies, cleared the park of protesters. Some parts of the clearing operation resulted in volatile and even violent clashes between law enforcement personnel and protesters. I expect you all have seen some of the footage related to that clearing operation. A few minutes later, then President Trump walked across the street from the White House to make a statement and survey the situation at St. John's Church, which had been damaged in a protest the night before. You've undoubtedly seen the photo of President Trump holding a Bible in front of St. John's Church. At the time, many linked the president's appearance at St. John's Church with the law enforcement operation to forcibly remove the protesters from that park just a few minutes earlier. This is where I enter the story. As the Inspector General of the Department of the Interior, my office is the internal watchdog for the department and its various sub-agencies. One of those sub-agencies is the U.S. Park Police. So shortly after the events on June 1st, we initiated a review of the Park Police's actions to clear the park that day. Now, flash forward a year to June 2021, when we published our report. Now, it's worth spending a minute summarizing what our report said and what it didn't say. First, I want to emphasize, my office has oversight jurisdiction only over the Park Police and not the Secret Service, who was the other half of the Joint Command that day. That's an important point, as our report focused on the Park Police's actions and not the Secret Service. So, in sum, the evidence established that the Park Police cleared the park so that new anti-scale fencing could be safely installed in response to the destruction of property and injury to officers that had occurred in the days leading up to June 1st. The evidence further established that this operation to install the fencing had been planned earlier in the day, and that the contractor was already on site with fencing materials, and the Park Police had started the operation before they learned about President Trump's potential visit to the area. Therefore, we concluded that the evidence that we obtained did not support a finding that the Park Police cleared the park in order to allow the president to survey the damage and walk to St. John's Church. Our report contained a slew of additional elements, including clarifying key factual disputes, identifying several serious problems with the Park Police's operations, and making recommendations to improve the Park Police's operations in the future. We issued our report in June 2021, and needless to say, it attracted a fair amount of attention. For about 3 days in June, our report created a firestorm. There were strong reactions across the political spectrum. People either loved it or they hated it. One prominent reporter said on CNN that it appeared I was auditioning to be the IG at Mar-a-Lago, while others praised me for debunking the so-called Lafayette lie. For some, I was the second coming of the Messiah. For others, I was the second cousin of Satan. That is when the mean tweets appeared. Now, I'm sure you all have heard the advice. Never read the comments. So, of course, what did I do? I read the comments. All of them. And it wasn't just comments on Twitter. I read some comments on the articles related to the report, Facebook posts, and I even received hate mail on LinkedIn and at my office. One letter in particular said, "Mark Greenblatt, you're full of S blank blank T." That was the totality of the letter. I don't know why he thought I was full of salt. I don't even know what that means. Now, while I'm making light of this particular letter, things actually turned very dark. Many of the commentators seemed to like the alliteration between Greenblatt and Gestapo, which I found particularly distasteful in light of the fact that I'm Jewish. Now, you'll note that I'm phrasing all of this in terms of my own experience. And although this was not a pleasant experience in some ways, I was glad that the vitriol was directed at me personally and not the extraordinary staff who worked so hard to put this report together. That said, I'm sure you all heard the quote typically attributed to President Truman, "If you want a friend in Washington, get a dog." This quote certainly came to mind, to my mind during this episode. Now, all this table setting leads me to the questions I'd like to pose to you today. How does our society accomplish objective government oversight in a polarized and highly charged environment? How do we ensure effective accountability in a world that tends to overly politicize every issue? How do we achieve results when it seems like everyone has a keyboard and writes a dissertation in only 280 characters? In short, how do we conduct oversight in the age of Twitter? Now, before we turn to those questions, I want to pause for a moment and thank Catherine Getzen Willoughby and Dan Willoughby for sponsoring this lecture series, which honors Catherine's parents. This annual event provides an important forum to ask critical questions and look for solutions related to the vital issue of government accountability. I also want to thank Dean Auer, Professor Brad Wright, for inviting me to be with you today, and for all the work that Dean, Professor Wright, and SPIA staff put into organizing today's events. For Dean Auer, Professor Wright, SPIA staff, the Willoughby family, your collective commitment to public accountability is inspiring. So thank you for your dedication to improving our government and our society writ large. Now, turning back to the questions I posed earlier, I think there are a number of ways of how we can slice them. My remarks today will center on answering the questions specifically in the context of federal inspectors general. And I'll focus on 3 key themes, each of which is central to the work of an inspector general. I'm going to briefly describe those concepts up front and then dive into them more deeply. So first, Inspector General independence. Independence is the fundamental core principle that allows IGs to operate successfully. Now I want to stop here for a minute and just clarify. When I say IG, I'm referring to Inspectors General, not Instagram. That trips up my kids all the time. They think I work for Instagram. In any event, IGs were created as the independent entities within the agencies they oversee. And I'll tease this more out in a minute, but the bottom line is that we have to be able to operate in a way that enables us to make our own decisions and draw our own conclusions. And we also have to be perceived as operating independently. Second, a commitment to fair and objective oversight. We focus on the facts and only the facts, and we make sure that our work is based on solid evidence. Third, having the courage to speak the truth. Throughout our work, we have to have the courage of our convictions and speak up, even when there could be negative consequences. So let's start at the top. Independence. What does it mean for an Inspector General to be independent? IGs were created by Congress in 1978 in the post-Watergate era. We were created to be the fact finders who prevent and detect wasteful and abuse in each of our agencies. Virtually every federal agency has one, and right now there are 75 throughout the federal government. IGs were designed to be objective and neutral third parties inside the departments they oversee, and to be that objective voice, we must be independent from the department. In creating the Inspectors General, Congress employed several features to preserve our independence. First, we report not only to the head of the agency that we oversee, in my case, the Secretary of the Interior, but also directly to Congress. That is a unique feature of IGs, and it's central to who we are. It means we can't be muzzled by the department that we're overseeing because we have a direct line of communication, a direct pipeline to Congress. Now that puts us as a neutral party in the middle between the administration and Congress, which some people colorfully describe as straddling a barbed wire fence. I'll let you draw the imagery on that. Second, we decide our own work, what we address and how we address it. That means department leadership can't tell us what we must review, or perhaps more importantly, what we can't review. Third, we're apolitical. Under the Inspector General Act, IGs must be selected due to their expertise in specified areas and, quote, without regard to a political affiliation. Unlike the 95% of other appointees whose jobs end at noon on Inauguration Day when a new administration comes in, IGs generally serve across presidential administrations, including presidents from both parties. This means that IGs aren't beholden to any particular political official or political party. Fourth, we have our own budget, our own general counsel, our own hiring authority. That means if my department leadership is angry about a report from my office, they can't cut my budget. They can't fire my staff. So, why is being independent so important to our work? Independence is important for these two fundamental reasons. First, independence gives IGs the ability to select and conduct our oversight without being affected by outside influences that could compromise our professional judgment. Independence gives us the freedom to do what is right and proper. Second, it gives our stakeholders, namely the department, Congress, and you, the American taxpayers, the assurance that our work is unbiased and free from outside influence. That is why it's critical for us to be independent in fact and independent in appearance. So, as I close out my discussion regarding the importance of independence, let me shift back to the Lafayette Park Report and propose a thought experiment for all of you. I want you to think about how you'd handle the following situation. My office had just issued the Lafayette Park Report earlier that day. I understood it dealt with a very controversial event, and the report's findings would generate some controversy. The day the report was released, I was interviewed live on ABC News, and the interviewer told me that former President Trump had issued a statement about our report, thanking me for issuing the report and asserting that the report exonerated him. I wasn't aware until that very moment that the former president had issued a statement. I was learning about it live on national television. She then asked the question, do you agree with former President Trump's characterization of your report in the statement that he released, that it completely and totally exonerated him in the clearing of Lafayette Park? Now, think about that moment. Here's the thought experiment. Imagine you were me in that moment. How would you answer that question? I'll pause and let you think about it. So I'll share with you what was running through my mind at that moment. maintaining my office's independence. Paramount, in my mind, was protecting the credibility of our report and our office overall. I wanted to avoid politics as much as humanly possible. I understood that engaging in such a discussion would run the risk of politicizing our report and jeopardizing my office's great work. In preparing our report, our only goal was to reach the truth as well as we could. And as I just said a minute ago, we have to be independent both in fact and appearance. And these types of questions can lead us down a path where those principles can be questioned. All of that was going through my mind in about a nanosecond. So you want to know how I answered the question? Here's what I said. This is on the fly. I'm going to be honest. That's an uncomfortable position for me as an Inspector General. We are statutorily mandated to be apolitical and nonpartisan, so I don't want to engage in that type of colloquy. Folks are going to characterize our reports in various ways, and I think it's prudent for me not to engage, frankly, because I don't think that leads to good results. We want to maintain our apolitical and nonpartisan posture, so if you don't mind, I may take a pass on that question. Now, even though that's a short exchange, I think it illustrates how crucial it is for offices of Inspector General to remain both independent in fact and to safeguard the appearance of our independence. So, independence is the first element of my answer to the question of how we can conduct oversight in the age of Twitter. There are threats to independence, which I'll discuss later, and all of us must do what we can to preserve IG independence. Now I want to shift gears to part two of my answer, which involves fairness and objectivity. Fairness and objectivity means we focus on the facts and only the facts. We make sure that the evidence is guiding our work. Now, you might ask, what exactly is our work? And let me be brief. We have two main operative units in our office. One is the Office of Investigations, which is like a mini FBI. They conduct criminal and ethics investigations looking at specific misconduct. We also have the Office of Audits, Inspections, and Evaluations, what we call AINE. And that's like a mini GAO. And they look at programs, look at efficiency and effectiveness. A big part of AINE's job is determining whether your tax dollars are being spent efficiently and effectively. So with that summary, what does it mean for our work to be fair and objective? First, we follow the facts wherever they lead. We keep an open mind, we hear all sides of the story, and we make sure we're obtaining a full version of all relevant facts. Second, we don't go into audits or investigations holding preconceived outcomes in mind. Third, we make sure the evidence is driving our conclusions, not the other way around. We also give credit where credit is due. We're not hammers looking for nails. We point out when an agency program is doing well or when an individual has not committed the misconduct that they've been accused of. Now, tying this concept of fairness and objectivity back to the Lafayette Park report, I want to give you a few examples of how we ensured fairness and objectivity in that review. We set out to examine the actions of the Park Police took on June 1st to disperse the protesters in Lafayette Park, and to answer a key question. Why did the Park Police clear the park that night? And did they do so in accordance with governing rules, laws, policies, etc.? To do this, we had to gather and analyze extensive evidence, and there was a lot of it. We interviewed more than 20 Park Police and Park Service officials. We reviewed hundreds of Park Police emails and text messages, and we poured over dozens of hours of video footage. Now, importantly, we also examined evidence from outside the agency and outside the Park Police in particular. This was important to make sure we weren't just getting one perspective. So, for example, we had obtained evidence from the DC Police Department, the Secret Service, the contractor who put up the fence, members of the DC National Guard, and others. Now, once we had the evidence, we didn't come to the situation with a preconceived outcome in mind. We followed the facts, and the evidence drove our conclusions. I mentioned one of our report's conclusions earlier, that the evidence we obtained did not support a finding that the Park Police cleared the park to allow the president to cross the street and view the damage at St. John's Church. But we didn't simply rubber stamp the Park Police's efforts that day. Quite the contrary. We also had some hard-hitting findings about the Park Police's failures in carrying out that operation. For example, we found problems with the way the Park Police issued dispersal warnings to the crowd before the clearing operation. Namely, one, that not everyone could hear the Park Police's warnings, and two, the Secret Service started their clearing operation before the Park Police even started giving the warnings. Now, those failures, in turn, led to confusion within the crowd and reduced the possibility that protesters would heed the warnings and voluntarily clear the park. Furthermore, we found weaknesses in the communication between the Park Police and other law enforcement entities that exacerbated these problems and may have further contributed to the confusion. Finally, we also found that the law enforcement's use of tactics appeared to be inconsistent with their own operational plan. Now, all of these findings led us to make two recommendations to the Park Police to improve their future operations. On the whole, our report took a nuanced and comprehensive look at the Park Police's actions that day, and we called it like it was. In other words, we were fair and objective. So that's part two of my answer of how we conduct oversight in the age of Twitter. Now let's shift gears to my third element, having the courage to speak up no matter the consequences. As I mentioned earlier, IGs are the independent watchdogs in federal agencies. We do not have terms, and we are not part of presidential administrations. Many current IGs have served through multiple administrations and under presidents from both political parties. That reflects our nonpartisan, apolitical nature. In 2020, this practice was put into question. IGs were removed for circumstances that led to widespread concerns that it was done with a political motive or to limit IG's ability to do certain work, especially sensitive investigations. This created substantial worries in the IG community and among stakeholders in Congress and the public that IG's willingness to undertake sensitive work would be chilled, or that the IG independence and objectivity would be compromised. After the IGs were removed from their positions, it was a dicey time. No one knew whether anyone else was going to get fired, and if so, who. There was a lot of tension hanging in the air. In those months, my office finalized a number of reports that touched on sensitive issues, including more than one report that found senior political appointees had engaged in misconduct. For example, in this fraught time, my office issued a report that a very senior political official in the department had retaliated against a whistleblower. Issuing that report and the others may have been risky. Other IGs had been removed by the president, and I certainly was concerned about the same thing happening again. I love my job to start with, but more importantly, I knew that this would have a significant and destabilizing effect for my team and the broader IG community. Firing an IG for doing independent work chills oversight in many ways and can deeply undercut morale. Nevertheless, my office prepared the reports that we believed the evidence demanded, and we released those reports when they were ready. It definitely led to some uncomfortable moments. A couple of times I joked with my staff, "This is the report that's going to get me fired." Now that was certainly some gallows humor, and some of my staff did not really appreciate my attempt to inject levity in such a tense time. But I knew my team had prepared the reports to reflect the evidence they had gathered, so issuing them was really the only choice. It also meant that I could wake up every morning and look myself in the mirror with the confidence that we were doing the right thing. The important lesson I took from this and from those times is that I have to approach my job with courage. The courage to tell the truth, even if the consequences of telling the truth could be difficult for me and my office. I felt an abiding responsibility to my staff, who had done the hard work of compiling the evidence and preparing the reports. I felt an abiding responsibility to the rest of the Inspector General community. And, not to sound corny, but I felt an abiding responsibility to the American public to continue to do my job in a fair, objective, and independent manner. And that's really the core of what an IG does. Tell the truth, don't pull punches. Therefore, buckling to pressure or pulling punches out of fear of consequences would undermine the whole construct of our positions. Now, just like those reports, all of that applies to the Lafayette Park review, which came a year later. I knew the report might be polarizing because the issue was emotionally charged and controversial on both sides. I understood that some of our conclusions ran counter to what others had reported, and that it might take people by surprise. Remember when I was talking about straddling a barbed wire fence earlier? This was that moment. But as the IG, leading an organization with the mission to oversee the actions of the Department of the Interior, I knew that we had to stick with the facts and the evidence, not pull punches, and have the courage to tell the truth, even when the truth was unexpected or unpopular. In this case, I had all the confidence in the world in my team and in their due diligence in gathering the relevant evidence, in reviewing it thoroughly, and analyzing it objectively. Because I knew my team was good, that they had done exceptional work, and that they were telling the truth, I was prepared to take the heat. Now this leads me back to where I started with that old saying, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. That was certainly my initial reaction when I saw all those mean tweets and comments. It felt like we didn't have any friends. But when I thought about it a little bit more, I realized that wasn't entirely accurate. It is true that an IG is never going to be the most popular person in the room. And we probably shouldn't be. Our job isn't to be liked. Our job is to tell the truth, which can make us unpopular at times. If everyone likes what you're doing, you're probably not doing your job. But there were plenty of people who recognized that and stood by us, including people in my office, our peers in the OIG community, and others in the stakeholder community. When push come to shove, we did have friends in Washington, and not all of them were canines. So I'm not running out to adopt a dog just yet, although Ugga is damn cute. Because being popular on Twitter is not the barometer of our success. Rather, the measure of effective oversight for me is whether we've closely adhered to the three principles I outlined for you today: independence, fairness and objectivity, and the courage to tell the truth, no matter the consequences. By keeping those principles as my North Star, I know that I've done my level best to be an agent of positive change for my department. Now, in closing, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts. I expect many of you in the crowd are academics who might be looking for your next research subject. I'd like to make a pitch that the Inspector General community presents a slew of great topics for your next paper, thesis, dissertation, what have you. The work you publish moves the needle on government accountability, and we as IGs can learn from your research too. Others of you may be considering a career in public service. If so, I hope you will consider the Inspector General community as a place to share your talents. I may be biased, but for my money, there is no better place to be a public servant than an IG's office. If you're interested in a position where you're guaranteed to help drive important changes that make government more effective and ultimately more accountable to the American taxpayer, please give the OIG community a look. And if you do work for an IG shop one day, and I hope you'll remember this lecture and think about what I said today, and keep this one important takeaway in mind. Actually, this goes for everyone here and everyone out in the virtual space as well. I want you to learn from my mistakes and do as I say, not as I do. Never read the comments. Thank you. Thank you.
So here's how we'll proceed now. We have several folks who are joining us on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to remind those folks to please send us your questions through the Q&A function. Then in addition, we've got this wonderful room of participants. And so we'll just do the old-fashioned raise your hand. However, I ask that you wait until a microphone is provided to you so that folks online can hear your questions. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to questions. We do have a couple that have come in through Zoom, and so I'll ask those. And I should also just thank you for the wonderful remarks. I'll start with few that have come in. Can you elaborate on how IGs are hired and fired? If IGs are able to span across administrations, why would they get fired? How does that work?
So let's deal with the first part first of IGs being hired. That is, there are two kinds of IGs. There are the presidential appointed, Senate confirmed, and then there are other kinds, about half or so, that are appointed by their agency heads. And it's called PAS, Presidential Appointed Senate Confirmed, and DFE, Designated Federal Entities. And so you have PAS and DFEs. PAS go through the White House, and they're appointed, nominated by the president, whoever the president is at the time, and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. That was the path I went down. DFEs are by their agency heads. So, for example, we have dozens of them, where the agency heads go through a recruitment process and determine who they select to be inspectors general. For the most part, IGs do not have terms. There are a couple that do, but in the main, 70 plus, I think, do not have any terms. They can be removed from office by the president or by the agency head, depending on which, whether they're PAS or DFE. And reasons should be, the practice over the years has been that it's not for reasons related to politics or what the IG is doing, but rather, for example, if there's misconduct. We do have IGs that have engaged in misconduct. And that would be an appropriate situation where they should be removed. So that's generally how it has been, is through misconduct or if they're incapacitated in some way. So that's the general standard. And as I mentioned, that there were concerns that changed in 2020 with the removal of two IGs, and that sent shockwaves throughout the IG community, which I talked about for a moment.
Here's a second question. Congress just passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. Thinking ahead, how might your office become engaged in monitoring Interior's role in programs and activities related to the infrastructure bill?
Absolutely. We've been on that for several months trying to plan. The problem is you don't know if it's going to go forward, so you can't start hiring in advance. We don't have the funding to hire in advance of those things. It's not like a corporation that can kind of plan. We're not that nimble in that way. But we've certainly sketched out what we would do if the bill does get passed. And now that the sort of the light switch has been turned on, we're going to be engaged more heavily in staffing up and looking for very specific areas where we can target those additional funds. One thing that we did, which I think was quite successful, I'm talking about the IG community, is we argued to Congress that they should be thinking about oversight at the beginning of the dispersal of funds, not later, right? So what we want them to do is bake that in the cake now, so that we can start adding value to the infrastructure efforts now, not years down the road. And so that's something that we have made a concerted effort as the IG community to get out in front of these supplemental packages and try to say fund oversight then, not years down the road, or not at all, in which case we have to basically rob Peter to pay Paul. We have to move from other oversight activities and basically shortchange those in order to focus on these new emerging priorities. So Congress did that, at least with respect to my office and a number of others. And so I was pretty gratified to see that.
Here's a Lafayette Park question. So I remember the Washington Post doing a very exhaustive investigation on the Lafayette Park incident. To what extent does an IG's work with the press utilize their findings, etc., during your investigations? What is the relationship with the media like in general?
So that's an evolving question. I think for a long time, the Inspector General community, the oversight community writ large, did not engage with the media very much. And I think that is changing a little bit in the sense that I think folks in the IG community recognize that getting out and promoting our work, I don't mean promoting, like a concert promoter or anything like that, but actually, spreading the word about our work maximizes our impact, rather than, I think the prior etiquette was, we're the auditors and investigators that should remain in the background. My problem with that is that I think it's too easy for the agency to disregard what you say. If it's sort of behind the scenes, they don't have that external pressure to make the change that we believe is appropriate. So I embrace the media exposure, both good and bad, because I think it strengthens our hand. I'm talking about the Office of Inspector General. I think it maximizes our impact such that the agency can't walk away from our findings. So I think we should embrace it more than sort of historically the etiquette has been, in the past.
How do you remain apolitical, especially with reports like the insurrection? I'll add maybe to this. Is there, with respect to the January 6th insurrection, was there a DOI moment in terms of your work?
There are two connections, and I can't comment on the nature of what we're doing, but we have said publicly that we are engaged on work related to the January 6th events. So I can't get into what exactly, but there were two small. We're a relatively small piece of that story, frankly, just to be very honest and just to set expectations. Unlike Lafayette Park, where the park police were a major factor in that, the Department of Interior footprint on that particular engagement was not quite as significant. It was much more about some of the other agencies that were involved. So there were 4 inspectors general that are coordinating on our efforts with respect to the January 6th events, but the other 3 have just a bigger footprint on that.
I should also pan the audience. If folks have questions, just go ahead and raise your hand. Here's one. If you can wait till the mic comes to you.
I hope you can hear me.
Sure.
So kind of pinning off of that last point, how receptive would you say agencies and programs are generally to the IG's input? And do you find that that independent aspect does create animosity, or maybe animosity is not the right word, but some chafing?
It really depends. There are some, first of all, I appreciate the question. Do we need to say that for the folks at home, or do they get that?
I think they got it.
Okay. So I appreciate the question. It's a great question. It really depends. And some offices are very receptive and are very forward-looking and embrace the opportunity to improve their operations. They embrace the outside entity coming in and looking. And sometimes you get folks who, as you said, chafe and who just don't like anyone mucking around in what they're doing. So it runs the gamut. And I don't think it's I don't think it's fair to lump everyone together, because it really is, in many ways, personality driven. It's the personality of leadership. It's the personality of the folks involved, the folks that you're auditing or that you're investigating. And so that's a bit of the nature of the beast. You're going to get that, and that's something we deal with. We know that. We know that's going to happen. You're going to get some folks who are receptive and some folks who are resistant, and it's just, it is what it is, that kind of thing. But you obviously wish that folks were more receptive to what you're doing. We are trying to make the place better. Like I said, we're not hammers looking for nails. When things are going well, we'll say it. You know what I mean? So there's an upside, I would argue, for management. The other thing is, even if we find problems, we're ultimately trying to help you. We're trying to help the agency. We're identifying problems that you may not even know about. And so we hope to convince them of that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we move forward regardless. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, great.
So here's another question. It's a question about the availability of your reports. Are all the reports available to anybody who seeks them, whether they're dispensed and put on the website or through freedom of information? Or are some actually secret and we're never going to see them?
Well, that answer runs the gamut, frankly, in the Inspector General community. My office is particularly on one end of the spectrum. We produce a lot of public reports, and many offices do not produce everything. Now, I should say this. Remember, we broke down the house into 2 smaller subunits: the mini GAO, which is our audit side, and the mini FBI, which is our investigative side. So let's split those up because they handle this question differently. All audits, inspections, and evaluation, virtually all, are published online. So you can get our audits and inspections and evaluations going back years on our website. On the investigative side of the house, it's much more nuanced. You have some offices that release 0 reports of investigation, literally 0. And then you have others that issue everything. Well, not everything, but you have others that issue more. My office is on the more side of the spectrum than the less side of the spectrum. But it is a very difficult line to walk. It is very resource intensive to post things online for the federal government. So that is a hard line to walk. But that is also very dependent on each agency, each OIG. I'll also note that folks in the intelligence space, DOD, DHS, there are probably some that we'll never see. Congress will see them, but they won't be posted online, because of the nature of what they're dealing with. Also, we have sensitive situations, like when we talk about IT audits, where we do penetration testing, say, on our own, I'm talking about DOI. We don't want to publish something that's going to make the situation worse. We don't want to give a roadmap to hackers, to Russian hackers or whatever, to break into DOI systems. So we're very sensitive about what we're publishing, but those are relatively rare. In the main, all of our audits, inspections, and evaluations are available online. And in fact, they're mandated by law, by the IG Act, that we must post them online within 3 days.
Kind of a related question in terms of information sharing. How would you describe your relationship with the Government Accountability Office and congressional investigators on reports that your office publishes?
Two very different situations between GAO and Congress. GAO, we have a great relationship. I personally have a great relationship with GAO. My office does. Many in the OIG community, we view them as sort of comrades in arms in the accountability space. So we have a good relationship with them, and Gene Dodaro, who's the head, who I know who gave this lecture a few years ago. Gene is wonderful. He is the godfather of the oversight community, and so he is very supportive of IGs, and we are very supportive of them. We go through a deconfliction process where if we're going to start an audit, we actually reach out to GAO and say, hey, are you guys operating in this space? We don't want to duplicate effort. And they reciprocate. They do the same for us because we don't want to be occupying the same space that's inefficient. And that would be quite ironic for us to be inefficient in our oversight work. Right, we're looking for efficiency, right? So that's GAO. The Hill is a very nuanced relationship, and sometimes things are very, very positive and constructive, and sometimes it's very negative and very, very combative. It really runs the gamut, and my philosophy is to engage with the Hill as much as humanly possible. We want to make ourselves available. As I said in my remarks earlier, we report to the Hill. We report directly to the Hill. So this is not a collateral duty. We have to engage with them. We should engage with them. It is appropriate for them to oversee us. That is their job. That's the construct we're in. They oversee IGs. That's okay. And my view is we have to engage with them. We have to develop good relationships with them such that even when we disagree, even when they're angry about what we did, then, like the Lafayette Park report, you still maintain good relationships with them so that when that rainy day comes, you don't have a complete breakdown in the relationship. So I hope that gives some texture on those relationships.
It does. Thank you. We've got about 5 minutes, so a couple more. Kind of a personal question. So what got you interested in politics in the first place?
It's a great question. I would say I'm not in politics. Just to be very clear about that, I do not view myself to be in politics. I am adjacent to politics. I am aware of politics. It affects my life, but I am not in politics. But anyway, I will reframe that question as to how did I get into public service? And I would say that I guess it started back with my mother. My mother was a public servant, and so I always had this very positive view about it. But the real moment came when, and I think we talked about this last night. I was working as a lawyer at a couple of law firms in New York, doing big-time commercial litigation, and it was challenging. It was interesting. I was making ungodly amounts of money as a junior lawyer, but it was unfulfilling. I was making arguments that my clients had paid us to make. And I realized that I was only making those arguments because that client hired us before the other side hired us. If they had hired us first, I would be arguing the exact opposite with as much conviction. That just felt unfulfilling for me. There are people who love that. God bless them. They can do that. They make gobs and gobs of money. That's fine. That's their choice. But for me, I needed a moral quality to what I was doing. A friend of mine actually characterized it recently, and I thought it was great. He said he wanted moral income. And that's what I needed. That's what I realized in those moments, those late nights working for the law firms, is that I needed a moral component to what I did. And that drove me to public service. And, you know, that was 20 years ago.
Wonderful. Got a couple. Yeah, maybe one.
So we're often told that words are just words. However, we know that words can have a negative impact on us and that words can be effective. So my question is, how are you able to combat the negativity from the social media comments?
That's a great question. How do we combat the negativity on social media? I think you just have confidence in the team, confidence in the work, that you know what you did was the right thing. I feel great about what my team did. And it's really, you know, from my perspective, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, right? I'm standing on my team, and what they did was great. And so that's how I feel like I can weather the storm. You just got to let that roll off you like water off a duck's back. You know, you know, one of the things I did when the tweets came out, I have a 12-year-old son, and I said, well, maybe I'll use this as a lesson for him. And so I showed him the tweets, which are horrible. I mean, you read some of those things. You know, he's seeing his dad getting shredded. And I said, but this is a moment where you, telling my son, you know, you should be learning about having the courage of your convictions. If you think what you're doing is right, you can take the hits. And I think him seeing me kind of laughing to some degree about these, what I believe to be misguided tweets, you know, that was how I kind of turned the negative into a positive. But also it's just the conviction. It's just, I believe in my team. I believe what my team did was right. And that just, you know, allows you to get up in the morning and stand on 2 feet and said, we did the right thing. There are going to be people that are angry about it. But it's also, you know, I don't know any other way to say it, but it's sort of like welcome to big leagues. I mean, if you're going to be doing things like the Lafayette Park report, you got to be prepared to take the heat. And that's, I think, you know, that's a critical part of what we do, but also what I personally do. You know, as the Inspector General, they're not going to write about you know, my staff. They're going to write about me. And so that's why, you know, I just have to be dialed in and connected to, you know, with my team, connected at the hip with them, basically.
So I think we have just one last question to pose. How, if at all, is it different working with Department of Interior leadership on investigations, audits, etc., under Trump's Department of Interior Secretary David Bernhardt versus Biden's DOI Secretary Deb Haaland?
Okay, top 10 questions I won't answer. Let me say this. This is going to be a general comment about all presidential transitions, all. Republican to Democrat, Democrat to Republican, right? So there's no political, you cannot misconstrue what I'm about to say. Typically what happens is that our investigations, our audits, they take time. So there's always a lag time. The thing happens, and then we come in and audit and investigate it. And so it takes a year or so for us to issue our findings, right? So we're still issuing reports related to events that occurred under the Trump administration, right? It takes time for a new administration to come in and do what they're doing. And invariably there are mistakes made or issues happen, events, you know, things happen, right, that we then investigate and audit. So there's naturally going to be a time when you're looking at the old folks and you haven't really started at the new folks, right? So any transition that you have, you're going to be, you know, in my case, the golden boy, because you're hammering the old folks, right? But inevitably, that's going to change when we're looking at ongoing activities. That's just the nature of the beast. There's just a lag, and that lag changes, you know, the relationship over time. So anyway, that you know, I think that is true, like I said, for all presidential administrations, where there's just a time. They don't walk in the door, you know, having an ethics problem materialize. You know, I mean, that just takes time over, you know, and that's when we will come in and do our work and then release the report. So there's a little honeymoon period, you know, which is natural for every transition. You know, that's my elegant dodge of that question.
Well, I conclude from your remarks and your answers to these excellent questions that you don't have an easy job, but you have a really important job. So thank you for doing that. And I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have a reception. I hope you'll join us. And I know you have to get back to DC shortly after that. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.